Hi, this is Pete. I want to extend the last demo where I showed you basic table operations and try and show you what it's like to use Python generally and specifically Python functions within Deephaven as a more, slightly more intermediate use case. Let's start by just getting some data. I'm going to calculate betas by looking at log returns of stock prices versus log returns of spider. I'm just going to use static data, but you know that it's equivalent to move between static and updating data in regards to Deephaven. The reason I'm doing this is because I want to compare it to pandas, which we know only handle static. I also need to have a list of stock prices from that table T. So there we go. I'm going to define a beta calculation function where I'm going to use NumPy arrays for spiders and respective stocks, and I'm going to use a scikit-learn linear regression model to calculate betas. Very simple stuff. I'm going to import those and then create that function. And then I'm going to use that function in two ways. First, I'm going to use it where I convert this table to a pandas data frame, and then I use a pandas method with those two NumPy arrays to loop through symbols, right? I'm going to do a loop on those respective symbols to use my beta function that I've defined above here inside a pandas data frame to calculate those betas, right? So let's see that. It should be very quick. Sure enough, now we have those betas calculated here, as you can see. Our users like to use pandas. Oftentimes they'll take updating Deephaven tables and convert them to pandas via periodic snapshots or one-time snapshots to look at statically, or obviously historical data that way. But we've also tried to make it so that it's easy to marry these custom Python functions you write as well as third-party libraries to Deephaven directly, so you can get the benefit of real-time data and other at-scale workloads. So in this case, we're going to use that same method of that we defined of compute data on that same table, but then instead of looping through symbols here, we're really just going to use vectorized capabilities of Deephaven to calculate, to use those two arrays and calculate betas directly on Deephaven tables. And sure enough, you can see that these two outputs are the same using these two respective methods. If this was a real-time table, this one would continue to calculate and update in real time, whereas for pandas, if you insisted on using pandas on real-time table, you'd have to introduce a periodic snapshot as an intermediate step. So this is a basic example, stepping into something more intermediate perhaps. I can get rid of these because they just don't matter now. So this is another use case. All we want to do is we're going to define a very simple function that tries to I'm going to get some data, and I'm simply going to calculate the impact function. This is a ticking table. This is a real-time table that's coming in. I think the last 1,000,000 records or something like that, because I've tailed it. So I'm just going to calculate the impact, as some sort of function of price times size, and then I'm going to arbitrarily define what big impact is. And I'm going to have a second table that says, I'm only going to see, the output when, the impact is more than that big impact that I've arbitrarily defined. Okay, so now we see a small table where these are the 22,719 trades right now that are bigger than that. And now we're going to set up in Python a real-time listener, right? So I've defined an alerter here. I've used Deephaven capabilities to set this up. And now I've created a listener so that as there's new records added to this table, right, we should see that those new records certainly are showing up here in the table, but also we've set up an external, a listener that in this case is just printing this out, but you could connect this listener to some sort of external application if you so thought, or I don't know, print it to Slack or something like that. Our customers and users have done things like that in a myriad of ways. Sure enough, more of these have come in. There you go. So that's a second use case. Moving on to a third that probably I won't run, but as a preview for the next demo, here's a program that oftentimes I'll demonstrate that is intending to go out to Seeking Alpha and use inside of Deephaven, Beautiful Soup and other Python libraries to pull in the transcripts from earnings calls that Seeking Alpha makes available, and to use natural language processing on them. So these libraries are used to just clean up the natural language, and then TensorFlow and Keras are used to process sentiment analysis thereof. So I wanted to describe here, or give you a preview or teaser of a more advanced use case where you're both listening to public data in real time from the web and parsing it using Python libraries, and then using AI libraries on that to determine sentiment analysis. We have a few blog posts about just this type of thing, and I'll sort of extrapolate on the concepts here in my next demo, where I'll walk through a credit card fraud use case in real time using scikit-learn.